So well done, you've made it out tonight, and that probably means that you have a little soft spot for science, is that right? Yeah. And if you have a little soft spot for science, then you might have a little soft spot for collecting science facts, like quirky little science facts. Does anyone like to store those away up top? Yeah, excellent, a few. So that means you might have heard of the one that every drink of water that you take, or for example the beers and wines in front of you, contains molecules that most likely were once dinosaur wee. You've heard that one before? So the dinosaurs had millions and millions of years on Earth to ingest and eliminate the water molecules before we came along. That's us, there's a little red blip here. And of course, water is a finite resource, so it just gets recycled through hydrological cycles, and that means that most likely they got there first, it went in and out, and now you're drinking it. So the finite nature of our water resources presents a challenge for us here on Earth because, of course, we use 90% of our available fresh water for agriculture to produce the food that we like to eat. And we have a growing population, which means we need more food, but we do not have a growing water resource. That stays the same. So we have to figure out some solutions to that sort of challenge. And of course, for any given day in your life, the food and the drinks that you consume require, on average, around 3,000 litres of water to produce, which you might say that's like a crazy amount, but it takes, of course, a lot more water to actually manufacture and produce the food and drinks that you have than is actually in it. So if you have a beer in front of you like this, it took a really generous bathtub full of water to actually just create the beer that you have in front of you. So fortunately for us, we have lovely ecosystem services on this earth that clean our water for us. So as part of this sort of hydrological cycle in which plants play a very key role, our water gets filtered, recycled, reused over and over again. So 50% of our global precipitation will pass through plants on an annual basis, and plants contain a really abundant type of protein which is called aquaporins, so they're a water channel protein. And 25% of that global precipitation will be passing through aquaporins on an annual basis. So plants and aquaporins have a key role in terms of this process of filtering our water so that we're not drinking dinosaur pee. Now, that's awesome and we take that for granted here on Earth. But if you go into outer space, it's a different matter. So to tell us about this, we have Frank. So Frank is an astronaut with the European Space Agency, and just like you or I, on any given workday, Frank might have a cup of coffee. But the next day, Frank will actually drink the same cup of coffee, and a few days later, he will end up drinking his colleague's cup of coffee. So all the astronauts' bodily fluids have to pass through something like this, which is packed full of these aquaporin proteins to purify the water out of the bodily fluids. Everyone want to be an astronaut now? Yay! So this technology was developed initially by NASA. So the original filters they used to take up into space were really heavy. They only lasted a short time. They would fail to filter some of the contaminants. So they came up with this device that works by forward osmosis and is packed full of aquaporins. And that was inspired by the function of human kidneys. So that's where they got the idea from, because your kidneys are packed full of aquaporins, which help you in these sort of processes. So your kidneys will filter 170 litres of solute per day. It goes over and over and over. And in fact, that little effect that you might notice after you've had a drink and you're kind of like, oh, I need to break the seal, is partly because the alcohol triggers hormones which result in a greater abundance of an aquaporin 2 type protein in your renal places, and that results in greater flux of liquid. So from this original sort of idea, there's been a spin-off company, it's worth around $60 million US, which is creating this sort of technology for use in space. So that tells us, of course, that aquaporins are really important in this sort of filtration process. And that is the case for all the kingdoms of life. So if we go back in time, a long, long time ago, when you needed like the first sort of living cells, which were supposed to form around hydrothermal vents in the ocean. So they had a cell membrane, and as part of that process for them to be able to ultimately survive and thrive and evolve and adapt into other life forms, they needed to be able to control both the water and the ion transport in and out of those membranes. And we find aquaporins in basically every kingdom of life. So if you go to some of the single-celled algae in the ocean, they might have one or two of these type of proteins. But once you actually come to looking at higher plants, which have had a lot more time to figure out great ways to use these proteins, we find that some of the higher plants have duplicated and diverged these types of aquaporin proteins in their genomes, and they've accumulated slightly different functions, and they've become really clever at the way that they regulate them as part of their filtration process. So I work with a really brilliant team who are interested in how we can use the information that we're gaining from studying the plant aquaporins to figure out how we might be able to come up with solutions for humanity to help us to be able to separate some water resources from, say, for example, nutrient resources that can sometimes contaminate our water. So we often lose around 4 million people per annum globally due to dirty water, which is a problem that we have to try and solve with our growing population. And it might seem like a problem that's like miles away in third world countries, but this photo here is a bathtub from our neighbours just up the road in Yass, and this is from an ABC News article back in May. You can have a look, that looks really appealing. And that article is about how they would, not surprisingly, like their water rebates back. Thank you. So that's a problem that we're facing right now in terms of we create a lot of urban and agricultural and manufacturing wastewater. Often it's nutrient rich and it can cause toxic algal blooms. We really need both those nutrients and that clean water, and we need to figure out ways to separate them. Plants are brilliant at this, so we can learn from that process. So the industries as part of this membrane separation technology are growing. So the industry is growing by like 10% per annum, and is expected to be worth around $42 billion within a few years' time, just in case anyone wants to invest in our research. And the overall goal in terms of what we're trying to do is study plant aquaporins for the purpose of improving crop productivity. But we've seen a little side benefit here that we should be able to take our urban and agricultural and manufacturing wastewater streams, and we should be able to, similar to the way that plants do, isolate out the clean water and repurpose the nutrients from those solutions to feed into things like urban agriculture and vertical farming type solutions and become more environmentally sustainable to support our population. So I would like to say a huge thank you to the brilliant team that I work with in studying plant aquaporins. One of them has been dragged along here today. Sam, round of applause for Sam. Woo! And to these funding organisations that have helped to support our work. And please think about aquaporins every time you take a drink. Thank you.